finally had some time to work on this again today and get the learning straightened up. I think I have a good system that's working. There was a problem with the weight change in my methods I had, and I don't know where I got it from, some equation that basically ended a sigmoid function on the weight change here, and it wasn't working correctly. It was applying weight changes all over the place. So I changed it to a much simpler Hebbian weight change algorithm. It's just the learning rate times the weight times the activation of the postsynaptic neuron, and then times the activation of the presynaptic neuron. And this is 1 minus weight, so the amount that the weight can change, it maxes out at 1. We are currently subtracting some small decay for these methods, so it decays slightly. It hasn't been decaying much. I'm going to decrease this so it decays a little faster, and we'll see how this works. Basic setup then that worked well is what we've used before. Again, we're using this sort of a module here, setup where we have 2 input paths feeding a combined path, and we're just seeing how this activations move through these combined paths. Pretty standard configuration of my parameters that I've been using pretty regularly here. Had to work a little bit with some of these to get the activations to move correctly through this unit. Here's where we're at basically. So again, the inputs paths we have here are driving forward. So, and again, the input pattern swaps between 2 patterns every 50 updates, and we can see the similarities with pluses here. And this similarity now with learning drives through this whole path much better than it used to. Same with down here in the lower path, we have these the similarities, so the activations later on, at some point in time, mirror what we have later on when we're seeing the same pattern of the input. In fact, we're also seeing that here. Let me just start the update here. With the combined patterns, because we now have originally activation was not traveling through all of these, but now it is with the learning, and so we're seeing patterns here, and those are getting mirrored with the ones later on. Some generalization, but they're showing those, so that's good. I'm going to try a couple things now. I'm going to turn off one of these patterns to see how this works here, and then I'm going to try turning on both the different patterns and see how that. Okay, now I've turned off this first path, no inputs coming in here, so we have no activation, just some background noise there, and we have activations going then just across the lower path. But this is enough to trigger some recall or activations here. It's not as many nodes as we had before, but we are still seeing similarities to earlier activations, even just with one of the pathways showing up. So in my mind, this is similar to maybe seeing a printed word and hearing it spoken, and then having it coded, and then later on maybe just seeing it and then being able to recall it. Like to check later on if we can then push some of this back so we can actually visualize it or see the spoken words based on it. But it's a good start for this dual pathway stuff. Last thing I'm going to do is turn it to 2 different activation patterns and see what that does. So we're now sending 2 different patterns to the inputs, and because again this hasn't been trained very much on them, we're seeing some activation moving through, especially this top network pathway, but not that much in the bottom pathway. The activations really stopped after the first the B1 module. We're not getting any activations in B2 or B3. where in the top one we are. It should be interesting to look and see how the weights are. And because of that, we're not getting any activations then on the combined nodes because we haven't trained them, so it hasn't found any correlations between those two patterns. Let's just look real quick. Again, we're getting activations here. I'm just wondering what our weights are set at. Looking at the weights and see how many of them have been changed. I'm not seeing a lot of learning taking place there. Why isn't that there? Oh, of course, I've got to be clicking on nodes that are actually activated. Yeah, and so if I click on the nodes that are active now, look at the weight change in parentheses here. This one happened to have been changed and was part of some earlier activation, and that's why these are on there. So there are a couple nodes that maybe were part of an earlier lesson. So there are some high connections, high level. The weights are relatively high, and a couple things that are going off here. But in general, most of these nodes are not haven't been learned, and their weights haven't been increased. So this is a pretty good simulation that we're running here. And again, main changes we made were in our weight change rule, and then also with changing with these running totals, using the actual running totals and not the global size. I'm going to have to look later on and see. The running totals could get large with larger time frames, so I might want to monitor how the running totals are set up and maybe cap that off at 1. A value of 1, but right now it goes up, and it's often not uncommon for these running totals to go up to 4 or 5 right now running totals run over the last 20 updates, so it's not uncommon to have 4 or 5 updates or activations going into that. So, but pretty good. I want to keep working on this, and this was a pretty good simulation after the failure earlier.